I'm Matt Earls. I'm the library director. I'm very pleased to introduce Chris Poulos, our state representative, one of our state representatives, and Jason Rojas, the House Majority Leader. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice and quick.
Okay. Thank you. Before we start, I thought it would be appropriate that we take a brief moment of silence for the passing of former Governor Lowell Weicker. He was, some would call him a controversial governor. Some would call him a straight shooter. He said what was on his mind, and he was very direct. Regardless of your opinion, he did serve our state proudly. So I'd like to just take a brief moment of silence before we get underway. Thank you. Welcome to the 2023 legislative recap for the recent legislative session. I'm here with House Majority Leader Jason Rojas, who's a good friend and colleague, and we're going to talk a little bit about the legislative session and some of the details of that session. Legislation that I think impacts Southington and our state, things we're proud of. This was my first session. It started on January 4th and it ran till June 7th. And so it was a learning experience in a sense, but you get mentors very quickly and people that help you guide you along the process. And really, I felt that I was able to add some value as a first-time legislator. I served on the Commerce Committee, the Education Committee, and the Veterans and Military Affairs Committee. And I'm going to talk about some of the legislation that we put forth in those committees tonight, along with some other stuff. State Representative Jason Rojas from East Hartford and Manchester is our House Majority Leader. I'm going to give him a moment to self-introduce, give a little bit of background. I'll say this. He's served for many terms, and so our presentation tonight will be complementary. My perspective and view as a Southington resident, new to the legislature, with someone with a wealth of experience. Jason?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Thanks, Chris, for inviting me. It's always, I spend a lot of time actually going around the state because I go with a lot of colleagues and do presentations, and probably from my experience in the legislature, I can add a little bit more because I'm in my 8th term. And I've had the privilege to chair 2 committees, the Planning and Development Committee, which deals with all municipal issues, and then I was chairman of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee, aka the Tax Writing Committee. So obviously involved in negotiating 2 budgets. And obviously that brings a lot more information that I have at my disposal that I'm able to help my colleague answer questions. And then as virtue of being Majority Leader and previously serving as Deputy Majority Leader, in the Majority Leader role, you actually have to read every single bill. That's part of the process. So myself and a team of deputies as well as staff, every Monday, once committees start reporting bills out, we sit down and we read them all. And sometimes it's 10 bills a week, 15 bills a week, and then there's a couple of weeks towards the end of March, early April, where there's 100 bills. So you spend every night chipping away at that list of bills. And part of that process is for us to determine, is it good policy? Does it cost money? But the most important thing we do is it doesn't need to go to another committee. So one committee might report a bill out. It might have something in that bill that's the cognizance of another committee. So that means we have to refer it. And our Republican colleagues actually have the same process on their side. So they'll read all the bills. They have a team of people who read all the bills, and then we actually get together and we compare notes and then we negotiate. Naturally, Republicans want to send bills to a lot more committees than we do because every time you send a bill to a committee, it increases the chances that it might not get out. It might die in that other committee. So they'll make requests of us. We'll grant some of their requests. We'll deny some of them. But it's all very cordial and bipartisan. And a lot of the work that we actually do, I'm sure you were surprised by the level of bipartisanship that actually gets done in that building. It doesn't necessarily get reported out in the media because that's not particularly interesting for you. Oh, look, they agree. And at the end of any legislative session, between 85 and 90% of the legislation that actually gets passed at the legislature is bipartisan, near unanimous, or unanimous. And naturally, that 10 to 15% of the things, those are the more controversial issues, right? Criminal justice issues, gun legislation, usually the budget, but not in this past year because we had a bipartisan budget. But some of those more difficult issues, obviously, of that 10 to 15% where we don't agree, but we have a debate on it and vote on it and pass it. So a lot of work gets done like that, but that's my job as majority leader, kind of to manage the legislative process, keep the flow of legislation going through so that we can keep business on the floor going. And then on the day of session, I'm responsible for running the floor. So that making determinations about what bill is going to run on what day. Again, I work with the Republicans. We got these bills coming up. They know what bills are coming up on any given day. We generally don't surprise them. Sometimes we do. And then we negotiate from there too. All right, we have a controversial bill that they don't like. How about we debate this bill for 5 hours? We'll give you 3 or 4 of your bills and we'll call it a day and go home. And that's kind of the way the process works, but it's all very coordinated. Amendments are done with each other, just generally not too many surprise amendments. Sometimes there are. But this year in particular, I think I saw a level of bipartisanship that I hadn't seen in my previous 15 years, particularly on the Judiciary Committee, where some of our most controversial issues come from. I've never seen Representative Fishbein and Representative Staffstrom work that closely together, compromise. And while Republicans didn't vote on all the judiciary bills that we did vote out, they were fairly short debates given the actual content of those bills. So you can tell how controversial something's going to be. If it's a 2 or 3 hour debates, not too controversial. 7 hours, obviously it's a controversial bill. And we saw a lot less of that, which I think bodes well for the state of Connecticut when we can kind of put the partisanship aside and just try to get some policy done, even when we disagree. So.
Thanks, Jason. And I'll just echo that. One thing that was very pleasing to see is a degree of civility that is in place in that House chamber. And there's times where I agree or disagree with a Democrat or a Republican. But at the end of the day, we're all trying to do what's best, and there's no hard feelings, and everybody is very decent and civil. That was great. Jason mentioned the budget, and so I wanted to start off, I'm going to give an overview of why I like the budget, like what stood out the most for me, kind of a high-level overview, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Jason to talk about the specifics of the budget and how they benefit our state. As he mentioned, for me, the fact that this budget was bipartisan meant a lot. Okay, if you know me from my municipal government years, I was always willing to work across party lines, vote for what I thought was best and right, and we had 139 members to 12 in the House vote in favor of this budget, and 35 in the Senate to 1 vote in favor of the budget. So that means like people were agreeing, like Jason mentioned. Some of the big key points, when I went around and knocked on doors during my campaign, one of the most common comments that I got was, you know, my taxes are high. And this budget had a historic income tax cut, the first in 32 years. And while some people will see extra money in their paychecks because of that cut, I think it's even a bigger deal because when people are considering where to live, where businesses are considering where to set up shop, they're looking at Connecticut and saying, well, they just cut taxes. And in Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, they're not cutting the income tax. And so I think it sends a message to the region, to people in the region, and I think that's a positive. We eliminated more retirement income tax for seniors. I talked to a lot of seniors who talk about wanting to stay in Southington. They might have grandchildren. They might, for whatever reason it is, they don't want to move away. And so as it stood prior to this budget, if you made $75,000 or less in retirement income, you didn't pay income tax. But if you made $75,000 and $1, you got no benefit. And so what we did in this legislature is we phased that out from 75,000 to 100 for single filers and from 100 to 150 for married filers. And people thought it was kind of unfair, like there was a marriage penalty that why does an individual filer have a limit at 75 and a married couple have a limit, or people filing jointly have a limit at 100? Shouldn't it be 75 and 150? And so we worked to soften that marriage penalty. And so it was a priority of me, and I'm proud that we were able to help seniors. Lastly, when we increase funds in a budget for municipalities, we lower local property taxes. All right, we had a tough budget season this year with our local budget. Property taxes are going up in Southington, and we were able to get municipal funding for things like school and other government operations that are going to ultimately lower the local property taxes. So again, I'm very proud of that aspect of this budget. I'll move on to the next slide. This is more broad issues. I'm hoping Jason might be able to speak to some of those on the budget. and
Yeah.
then we'll get a little.
Yeah, I mean, so, looking at the balanced budget, and actually, obviously the budget begins when the governor proposes his budget in early February. That's really when the budget process begins. But even right around that same time, the legislature actually took action to continue some of the fiscal guardrails that had been put in place under the bipartisan 2017 budget. So we adopted those early, and, not everybody was happy about that. Certainly some of my more liberal progressive friends would like us to have more money on hand to be able to spend. But the rest of us, actually, it was a unanimous vote, so they even went along with it, because I think even some of my more liberal colleagues are realizing it makes sense to save money. It makes sense to pay down debt, because that actually frees up money for other priorities. And that's what happened. So, there were 4 guardrails that we put in place. There was a bonding cap, which limits how much we're going to bond in any given year. There was a spending cap, constitutional spending cap that put in place that limits our spending to basically CPI, to inflation. And then there was a revenue cap that was put in place. So we only allow ourselves to use 98.75 of the revenue that we actually take in. So every year that we pass a budget, there's a built-in surplus every year. You can look at it as a contingency account for things that might happen where we might need to spend more revenue for whatever reason. It's there. We're not spending it all. And perhaps the most important one, which has led to the historic surpluses that we've had in the state for the last couple of years, and half for this year too, FY23 surplus is looking at to be about $3 billion. The total rainy day fund is going to be about $6 billion, which means we're going to put another $3 billion towards paying down long-term debt and obligations, which I think is a really good thing for all of us. I know the business community looks very positively on that when we're paying down debt, because the longer that debt hangs out there, they're always wondering who's going to pay for it, and they think we're going to come after them to help pay for it. So they want to see us pay down that debt. And that was mostly created by what we call the volatility cap. So there's 2 ways to pay the income tax in Connecticut. I'm assuming most of you pay through withholding, right? Your withholding tax, and then and that's about 66% of the income tax that we take in a given year. The other 33% is brought in through something called estimates and finals. These are sometimes business owners. More often, it's folks who are investing in Wall Street and paying a capital gain. They pay their income taxes quarterly, their estimates and finals. But I talked about Wall Street. So when Wall Street's doing really good, so is Connecticut. When Wall Street's doing bad, Connecticut's in a far less healthy place, which has ramifications for all of us. And what was happening for generations is we'd have a good year, state legislature would take that extra money, budget it and spend it, and then the very next year when the economy tanked, that money was no longer there, we had a deficit, right? That's why we call it the volatility cap. So what we did in 2017 is says, we're going to set a cap on that estimates and finals at 33% of revenue, that we're not going to allow ourselves to spend more than $3.15 billion in any given year, subject to inflation, of that money. So anything that comes in above it, what we said we're going to do is we're going to put it aside in the rainy day fund. And when the rainy day fund hits 15% of our spending, it's going to automatically go and pay down debt. So it's paying down state employee debt, state health care, teacher retirement, as well as bonding debt. And that's how we arrived at. So we approved that in early February, which really set the stage for the kind of constraints, the constraints that we wanted to approach with this budget. Again, not everybody was happy about that. Higher education wanted us to spend more money. And we did give them significant resources. The nonprofit community wanted us to spend more money. Nursing homes wanted us to spend more money. Everybody wanted us to spend more money, right? But we had these constraints in place, and we couldn't otherwise do that. So we made a lot of really good investments in places that were really important to us as a matter of public policy. But we also continued to put a lot of money away. And obviously, I think, a lot of the intention about the budget has been about the income tax reductions that we saw. So we have about $460 million in income taxes and that are going to be seeing reduced. And, most people don't know there's 7 brackets within the income tax structure. And the way it works is you pay a certain percentage on a certain percentage of your income. So like the 3% bracket, you're paying that on the first $10,000 that you make as a single filer, or the first $20,000 as a couple. And then there's all these brackets, and it slowly goes up to there until you get to 6.99. And if you're at that rate, you're making $500,000 a year if you're single, or you're making more than $1 million a year if you're filing jointly. So what we did was reduce the first 2 brackets, right? So 3% went down to 2%, and then I'm trying to remember, all 4.5% went down to 4%. So everybody's going to see some kind of income tax reduction. They estimate that the average filer will save about $500 a year. It's still a significant amount of money. $460 million is a lot of money to no longer collect. But that's how we're getting at reducing income taxes on folks. And we also did increase the earned income tax credit as well, too. So for individuals who are making approximately $60,000 or less and have a child, they're going to see a bigger savings in their income tax as well, too. And we know that folks at the lower end of the income spectrum are going to spend that money immediately, and there is actually a stimulative benefit to that. More money in their pocket, they're more likely to go out immediately and go grocery shopping, buy a refrigerator, buy a lawnmower, whatever it might be, and kind of spur the economy. And that was kind of the logic in us wanting to cut cut taxes, which is something we'd like to do every year, but that we can't do every year if we don't have the resources to do it. Because the other side of the ledger is there is a lot of important funding. The biggest expenditures in the budget are Medicaid, right? So providing health care to elderly, disabled, and children. And then, of course, municipal aid is the next biggest expenditure, right? Which is ensuring that money comes to Southington for ECS. I think Southington got about $23 million in the budget in municipal aid. Obviously, that helps us mitigate property tax increases, knowing that, I don't know if you guys had a reval year. Did you guys have a reval year? No, yeah, but a lot of towns saw reval years. And because of the impact of the pandemic, we saw a huge shift and the burden of property taxes shift to residential because commercial properties have dropped in value because a lot of stores closed, restaurants closed, a lot of empty storefronts. So this recent revaluation has caused a particular amount of additional pain for residential property owners because the shift of that burden went over to residential. I don't know what other bullets I'm supposed to hit on there, but
I think you covered quite a bit.
yeah, the business community, I think they would have preferred that we've done lots of things to cut taxes. There is a business surcharge that's been on the books for a long time. That remained in place. They would have preferred to see that go away. But at the end of the day, and speaking with the business community, there's lots of other things we could have did that they disliked even more. So they can live with the surcharge for now. But they appreciate that, there's $800 million on the table for housing. We didn't increase the corporate tax itself, that we only left the surcharge in place. So all in all, it was a pretty balanced budget. It's the kind of budget where a bunch of people are happy, a bunch of people are upset. Usually that's the best outcome that you can get at any kind of public policy. So
thanks, Jason.
Yep.
So one of the themes I wanted to make for my campaign was connecting with community. And I, being a legislator, you think there's a lot of people up at the Capitol, but you're really up there and you're the representative from a small district. And so what I hope to do is spend at least half of my time in the district with the community so I could best understand their needs and then try to take that up to Hartford and, advocate for what people wanted. So I have a certain number of areas where I felt that I made positive connections. First one was connecting with education. I served on the education committee. We passed a number of big education bills. They have a lot of things in them. One of the problems I see as an educator, I'm a high school teacher. We have a major teacher shortage in Connecticut, across the nation. When you have a shortage in a particular sector, what ways to attract people is to hire more or to add more compensation or to make the quality of work better. And so as Jason explained, we had these guardrails in place that really limited what we could do to compensation. We gave a ton of money through ECS, $150 million to fund municipal school districts so that the budget process of funding schools was easier, but to actual individual teachers, there wasn't as much. Now, as the way I view how we could help teachers is to make them have a better quality of life. If you don't have money, if you can't give them a COVID pension credit, or you can't give them everybody a big raise, you could improve their quality of work life. One way of doing that is to give teachers agency, to give them a voice. And so, in 6880, there was a committee. There's a committee that. It is composed of a bunch of different education advocates. It's called the Cactopus committee. It's a long acronym, and we increased the number of teachers on that committee. So there's more active classroom teachers in those conversations about current issues in education that will ultimately report out to the legislature. We revamped the teacher evaluation process. So the process that passed about 10 years ago was heavy on metrics, on measuring, assigning a number to a teacher. The revisions and statutes to this process make teacher evaluation more meaningful, focuses on students and their learning outcomes. We put in place an audit on standardized testing. So, as a parent, I want to know how much time my kid is taking tests and how much we're paying as a town or a government on those tests, how much they cost. So we're going to audit that. We're going to get some information, and maybe we can make some informed decisions about how to, improve testing in schools. At the same time, they added language. It's not up here on play-based learning. That's not high school kids running outside and playing tag. That's maybe in lower levels of education. There's a science class. The kids work in groups. They build boats, and they start adding weights to those boats to see how much weight the boat can take before it sinks. So they're learning about the concepts of flotation and other physics concepts while they're having fun and playing and competing against each other. That would be an example of that. I think that balances out testing when you have play-based learning. We raised the kindergarten start age to being 5 by September 1st. There was some concern from people that said that this is going to cause a big cost to me to pay for additional daycare. And so in House Bill 5003, there was an amendment that allowed for an appeals process. So a parent can appeal that start date age if they would like to put their kids in earlier. And then indoor air quality became an issue during COVID. People started paying attention to their HVAC systems and their filters, and some work, some don't. And so what this does is it's not a fiscal mandate, but it just calls for walkthroughs and inspections. So at least districts can know if they have an issue with their indoor air quality. And the governor last budget, there was money for grants to address this, to help districts. Connecting with commerce. I was on the Commerce Committee. I've always been a big advocate for small business. Number of bills here, an act establishing Advanced Manufacturing Education Center Advisory Group. This was, as a member of the Manufacturing Caucus, which is part of the Commerce Committee, I discovered that there's a huge workforce shortage in manufacturing in our state. We can't find people to do these technical jobs. So robotics, high school robotics, which Southington has a long history and tradition of doing quite well, has become a pipeline for these students to get engaged and to fill these workforce positions. There was a manufacturing fair at the Capitol. We brought Southington manufacturers to the Capitol on the same day we brought students from robotics and other classes at the high school and the middle schools together. Some students, as a result of that, have internships and jobs this summer at some of our local manufacturers. I thought that was a win for kids and for these businesses. The act concerning the employment of certain minors at youth camps, okay? This allows for 15-year-olds to work at camps. We have Camp Sloper, Camp Corp, Fast Camp. I'm sure there's some religious camps as well out of some of the churches in town. This allows young people to be able to work in jobs that we need to fill. And it gives them work experience and teaches them a little bit about work responsibility, gets them in these roles earlier. Obviously, if someone's in a lifeguard position, there has to be an 18-year-old or an adult there to make sure that everybody's safe. And then the last bill I have here is a public health bill. And there was a resident that contacted me, Haiti Gajewski, and she had a license in cosmetology. And she wasn't even in the 81st district, but she had a business in Plantsville. And she said that because of changes in public health laws, that a specific aspect of her work, esthetician, thank you. I have trouble with that word. The licenses were separated, and that she was going to have to undergo $10,000 worth of additional training to continue to run her business. So did a little research, found out there was a fix in a public health bill, stayed in contact with Haiti and her husband Mark, talked to the ranking member, talked to the chair of that committee, was glad to see it pass out of committee, was proud to call them the day it passed out of the House, and was even prouder to call them the day the governor signed that bill, which saved her a lot of money and allows her business to run without a glitch. Not up here, but Craft Kitchen just moved to Plantsville. Mike Truss called me up. He said, Chris, I'm having issues with my liquor license. It was the Tuesday or Wednesday before Memorial Day weekend. He said, I want to do my big opening on Memorial Day weekend. Was able to help him get his license. For me, it's important to help these local businesses so that they could be they could have their livelihood intact, but also provide services and places to go for our residents. Connecting with veterans was also another priority for me. My father was a veteran. He served in the Army for 27 years as a reservist. He retired as a lieutenant colonel. We always thought about veterans. We always talked, they weren't just days off from school or holidays or picnics, but we talked about the sacrifices veterans made. So I asked to be on that committee. And when I was appointed, I called up Rachel Walkie from our Veterans Committee. I said, how can I help you? How can I help as a member of this committee? And she said, well, we have a coffee hour. It would be great if you could come and talk to some of our veterans. I said, better yet, we're going to invite Commissioner Sadi to come and speak. And he came. We had about 80 veterans come. Mr. Guarino was there. He talked about all of the services our state offers to our veterans. He talked about, whether it's health services or tax relief. And then I had an opportunity to share some of the legislation that we were working towards. Some of that's up there. Our municipal veterans services, that's our Veterans Committee. We made improvements to those committees, support from the state. We have one of the model veterans committees in the state of Connecticut, but it allows us to also help nearby towns that might not have that, and it prioritizes these committees across our state. A working group to address the concerns of the upkeep of veterans' graves. There are lots of veterans, their family no longer is here, and it's important for those people who gave the ultimate sacrifice that their graves are maintained, and so that's something we'll be working on in the months to come. Figuring out how we could do that best. And then there was a graduate school tuition to eligible veterans and their families. You have to think, when a veteran's transitioning back into society after active duty or after not having worked in a sector, we want to support that transition. We want to help them get the skills they need to be functioning members of our society. Typically, veterans move from place to place. We want to take care of their kids as well. That might be in a new location. I was really proud of my work with veterans. Connecting with the environment. Okay, Southington has a long tradition of preserving open space. It was on my last term on the town council. I was proud to vote across party lines. Didn't matter who had the idea to secure over 200 acres of open space, preserve over 200 acres of space in Southington. The Southington Land Trust is a key player in making sure that we preserve our environment. They had their 50th anniversary of being established. Was proud to recognize the Land Trust. They're a great organization, doing what's best for the protection of land in our community. Also, during the budget process, in March, I got a call from Mark Poulos, CEO over at the Y. He said, will you come up to the Camp Sloper? I want to talk to you about a project. There's a dredging project going up there. Many of you may know about it. It's a $3.6 million project. The Y raised $3.1 million. He said, we're $500,000 short. And so when I get requests for that amount of money, I certainly don't have it in my pocket. I try to throw out as many irons as I can in the fire. So I contacted Senator Murphy's office to see if there was a chance for congressionally directed funding. And I went back to the Capitol. I talked to the majority leader, Speaker of the House. I said, this is an important project for Southington. If there's any way we can get this incorporated into the budget through a grant. And so $500,000 through a Department of Energy and Environmental Protection grant is going to satisfy the remaining amount of that bill so we could properly dredge that lake. Now, you might say, well, why? Well, for one, Camp Sloper, in my view, is a natural gem in our town. Acres of land, Center point is that lake. I know as a kid, I attended the camp. I swam in the lake with my parents. They're senior citizens, they're 79 years old. They live on that side of town. We walk around that lake on a Sunday. I've hiked the Black and White Trail with my kids. It's a great outdoor center. It's open to the public on certain days, more than you would think. And so it's a great environmental and family project. More importantly, it's a child well-being project, because there's 4,500 kids a year that go to that camp. And while you have to pay a fee to go to the camp, many are covered by the fundraising of the Polar Plunge and other generous benefactors, so that kids can go there and be kids. In a day and age where kids are attached to screens, where there's high anxiety because of isolation from when we had lockdowns, and I'm telling you, I see it firsthand in schools, we need to provide opportunities for kids to go out, interact with other kids, fall down, cut their leg, get back up, and figure out what to do about it. And so this is I was proud to secure that money to help preserve our environment, but to help out our kids. And lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about connecting with public safety. Again, Senate Bill 1 is an education bill, but what it did, it has a lot of things in there, but one of the things it did was codify the role of a school resource officer in our schools through an MOU. You know, we had a public hearing on the Education Committee, and you know, from community to community, these SROs have different roles, right? I personally don't believe they should have a policing role. I see Jimmy Valentine, who's pictured in this picture with me, and I was introducing him to the education chair when we toured the high school. They are a resource for our disengaged and vulnerable students. And so when school resources establish good relationships with these students, right, they're gonna help them to make better decisions. They're not gonna wanna let the SRO down. I see it in my school. The SRO in my school has kept kids off of drugs, and so they're very valuable. If we keep kids on the straight and narrow, if we keep them engaged, we're gonna have less crime when they get out of school. So for me, that was important. I think it's a great proactive public safety measure. One thing I did when I was elected was I called up Chief Daly. I called up the fire chief. I called up the head of their collective bargaining units for both of those offices, both those departments, and the town manager. And I said, what is it you need? And so I actually sat down with Chief Daly, and he said, I really would like this bill to be introduced. Would you do it? The one concerning the arrest powers of police officers responding to requests for mutual aid. So what that means is, if Chief Daly says, I need mutual aid, I need police officers from another town, and he calls up the Plainville chief and says, can you send some guys over? Those police officers come and they could function just like a Southington police officer. They could patrol and arrest, and prior to this law, they couldn't. Okay? So in a day and age where we have high incidents of car theft, and there's crime, it's a reality. We're working to address it. We've heard about this at town council meetings and reports. I was talking to Councilwoman DePaulo about that the other day. It's a tool that chiefs can use if they need to address a situation. 6796, an act concerning interstate agreements to combat catalytic converter thefts. It's an issue, okay? Now, is that bill gonna solve the problem? It's not going to solve the car theft problem or the catalytic converter problem, but it's going to help. And the more things we can do to contribute to try to combat these problems we have in our society, the better. An act concerning risk protective orders. A risk protective order is when you have a resident who is deemed that they're going to possibly hurt themselves or another person, the police can request a risk protective order to go and get their firearm from them. Okay? It's not haphazard. It just enables, it's another tool to keep our communities safe. I talk to a lot of people, and I'm sure I'll get questions about the gun law. The one thing that lawful gun owners said to me, they said there's two big problems. We have to get the criminals, and we have to address mental health. Okay? And so through that bill, HB 6877, it's a vehicle for addressing people who are mentally not well that might cause a problem with a firearm. That's an overview of how I've tried to connect with our community and some of the issues that I've heard about from people that seem to resonate the most with our residents. We have some time now for questions and answers.
always my favorite part.
But I'd be happy to entertain any questions or answers that people might have. Oh, sure. Yeah.
Can you address what the legislature is doing to help with the child care crisis?
Yeah, so that's a big one. As a teacher, I've seen firsthand the product of good childcare. It solves a lot of other problems if we have childcare in place. Sadly, the childcare providers are not paid a lot. There's a shortage of childcare providers, and so we need to work on that. I would say in future sessions. I don't know if you have any knowledge of.
Yeah, I mean, there's $60 million in the budget to support Care for Kids, which is one of the primary support systems that we provide to families to pay for childcare. And we also introduced, there's a new 25% credit that for businesses. We're trying to get businesses, you remember a lot of businesses used to run their own childcare, and then somebody else opened it up. So we're like, hey, we can save money. We're not going to run them anymore. Now we're trying to go back to the business community and say, we need you to play a role in this. Do you want your workers to come back to your work? And particularly, do you want your women workers to come back to work? We know that's been a crisis throughout the pandemic. So now if businesses invest in childcare, either by providing a subsidy to their employee or either operating their own childcare center, they can take up to 25% of whatever that cost is and deduct it from the business tax liability. But it's still far more complicated than that, right? That's not going to address the issue too. Part of the challenge is whether you're a parent paying for childcare, it's really expensive, but also if you're an operator, and part of what's driving the cost is there are minimum ratios depending on the age of the child for how much staffing there needs to be, and that's what really drives up the cost. But we also find that a lot of early child care providers are leaving the profession for other jobs, particularly as the minimum wage has gone up, or there are other industries that are, paying above minimum wage. People are going to those jobs and taking them. You can go to an Amazon factory and now make more than what you're making minimum wage. So that's part of the challenge we face, and it's a difficult balance to strike. We would like to raise wages, but it's going to cost money, and obviously somebody has to pay for that. Who's going to pay for that? All of us who have children who are looking for childcare. But there is a good amount of money in the Care for Kids program, and then introducing that new tax credit were some of the ways we were seeking to address that issue.
Thanks for that. And, next, I had a long conversation with Representative Meskers from Greenwich, and early childhood is a big priority for him. So I'm looking forward to collaborating with Representative Meskers in the next session to see what we can do within the fiscal guardrails that we have in place in terms of how much we could spend and how much revenue we have. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, Chris. I'm Bill Marcarelli, and thank you for returning my email.
Yes, sir.
Have you covered, I came in late, did you cover Social Security in your presentation?
So we talked a little bit about the budget and the benefits for seniors in terms of retirement.
Okay.
I sent you that email, and I have updated numbers in the packet. If you picked one up, there's a grid in there that talks about retirement income.
Yes.
And how there's no more cliff.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, it phases out a single filer from 75 to 100. There's a phase out, and then for joint filers, it's 100 to 150 phase out. Okay. So we've expanded the tax relief for seniors in terms of that retirement income, and we've eliminated the cliff, which we're very proud of.
Okay. Now, I think at the beginning of the session, I think either you co-sponsored or submitted a bill that kind of addressed accelerating the phase-in amounts for the tax waiver. Did that happen?
Well, we did that in the previous budget. So back in 2017, we began a 7-year phase out.
Right, but I thought
and
with the
we went straight to 100%.
I understand that, but I thought with you went to 100%.
We did, yeah.
It's in 2017
No, in the last budget.
on the last ball. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's only hit the 5-year.
Yeah, we were in year 4. We went right to year 7.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
Good.
Sure. Yes.
A little bit about the changes that were made to energy regulation in the bills that came out, especially with rates.
Yeah, I'll start off with one piece of information, and then I'll defer to Jason for some of those details. One thing a common thing people call you up and they'll say, "Hey, I need you to lower my energy bill." And so it's not in the authority of the legislature to change the price of energy. But one thing I was proud to vote for was there was a bill that said that Eversource, for example, can't spend our money that we pay our bills with on lobbying and marketing. Okay, so that's a way we can kind of impact what they're charging and what you're paying. I'll turn over.
Yeah, it's one of the more, I don't even sugarcoat this. It is really hard to make an impact on energy costs, absent lots of other things that perhaps none of you would like, right? Opening up a new gas plant, nuclear power, expanding it, right? Those are increasing gas pipeline capacity. Those are all things that would impact energy costs, but those are also things that most people don't want to see happen. So you're right, it is difficult. I mean, we've certainly called for more accountability for Eversource. They're on a performance management type of basis now too, so that they're only getting compensated based on the price of energy. But we all know January 1, everybody was losing their mind because the rate doubled. Coming this Saturday, we're going to see the rate cut significantly because a lot of it is otherwise out of our control, right? It has to do with the price of gas out there in the world market, and it's also based on the last 6 months of prices. So, you know, they set the price twice a year, January 1st and July 1st, and luckily, you know, the gas market has stabilized a little bit, and we're seeing those prices come down, and that's going to be reflected in the new rates that come into effect on July 1.
Thanks. Katie.
I just wanted to thank you for working with House leadership and ensuring that we to Red Silver Pond. That's a big deal for our community. And, how are they treating you in Hartford? Do you like being state rep?
Yeah.
Loves it.
It's great. I mean, if I were up to here with work and family before I was a state rep, I was up to here. So Jason talked previously about, like, you get bills and you have to read them. You get concepts. You have to, so there's a lot of homework involved. Yeah. And so I was able to, like, just extend my day a little bit on either side while preserving, like, my family life and my work life.
Now the tables got turned on them. You got a lot of homework now.
Yeah.
Instead of you giving it out. So.
But I mean, it's truly an honor, like, really, to be up there and to listen to so many diverse opinions. I get hundreds of emails. I'm proud to say, up until this morning, because I was preparing for this, I've responded to every constituent email. There's people in the room here that have emailed me or called me, and I respond to every constituent email. And I might have said this earlier, it's kind of a lonely job. And the highlight of the job is being with residents in district or even inviting up to the Capitol. One day I was there and I got a text that says, there's a school group from Hatton School outside the chamber. Do you want to? And I was in my element with kids. I'm a teacher. We talked about what laws they'd want, and the kids were, well, we want to shorten the school year,
Snow days again.
But and then having parents write me and saying, you really inspired my kid today. They're really interested in state government, and so it's those kind of the human part of the job that has really makes it rewarding. And you do your best to make life better for as many people as you can, and that's what I've committed to doing. Thanks for asking that question, John.
For those who aren't familiar with how you voted on HB 6738, could you explain that?
Could you just remind me what the bill was?
The act concerning compassionate medical parole and credits.
I voted no on that bill, okay? And I also voted no for the reappointment of Chairman Giles from the parole board. For people that don't know, under Chairman Giles' leadership, they changed the commutation procedures. A lot of people that were in jail for crimes, murder, were paroled. And I looked at that through the lens of the families. And I couldn't imagine being a family feeling that their family member was killed and the person was in jail, and they kind of felt, well, I'm at peace with this result. That person got their consequence, and then to have the consequence removed. And so that bill talked about additional paroles. Some of the language in that amended bill codified some of the procedures that Chairman Giles had put into place. And I didn't agree with them. So I voted no. Thank you for that question. Yes, sir.
What specifically are you most proud of in regards to HB 6667?
Thank you for asking that question. HB 6667 is the governor's gun control bill. I will tell you this, that was the hardest vote I made, and I put more time into that vote than any other vote. And here's how it transpired, okay? When I went door to door, I talked to a lot of Second Amendment, pro-Second Amendment gun owners. And they would ask me, how do you feel about the Second Amendment? And I said, look, I'm not a gun owner. I've never touched one. I said, when I don't have experience with a topic, I try to go to people that I trust that can give me some information. I mentioned my father was in the Army for 27 years. And I'd say, Dad, what do you think? And he'd say, Chris, think of it this way. If you want to drive a car, you have to take a safety class, you have to get a license, and you got to register the car. He's like, I think that's how we should handle gun ownership. It's like, if you want to drive a tractor trailer, you got to take a different safety class, and you have to have a different license. And so I believe that there has to be some controls on the Second Amendment. I don't think we should take away people's guns. Okay? I believe that people have the right to protect themselves, and they have the right to their sport. And so I got into the Capitol. I'm in my office one day, and my legislative aide comes to me and says, you got a call from a gentleman, Dave Beccaro. He wants to talk to you about the possible gun legislation. And he said to me on the phone, he's like, Chris, you knocked my door, you gave me your talk, what I just shared. And he said, if I could be of any help to you, please call me. So the governor put out a press release. It talked about all these things he wanted to do. So I picked up the phone and I called Dave. I said, I need to learn more about this. And so he invited me up to his house, and then we went up to the Southington Sportsman's Club. Like I said, I'd never handled a gun before. He set me up with an AR-15. Okay, I went on a range, 100 meter yard range, and I sat there and I for 4 hours, and I met with Dave, a member of the NRA, CCDL, the vice president of the club, and they're like, how do you feel about this? I was like, first time. And I said, I'm here because it's my job to listen to you. I'm here because it's my job to learn. I have to answer to you. But at the same time, I have to answer to the Sandy Hook Promise people. Because on December 14th, I went and put a wreath on that memorial. I talked to Ian Hockley, whose son was killed in that massacre. And I know it's not law-abiding people that did that. I understand it's mental health. I understand it's criminals that cause these problems. Okay, but I got to answer to everyone. And so I said, but here's what I can do. I promise you this. And I was honest. I said, I will always be honest with you. I said, first of all, the bill's going to pass. I hate to break the news to you, but the governor's bill is going to pass. No matter how hard I hit that red button, I could break that red button, this bill's going to pass. I said, so what we need to do is, I need you to take this press release, and I need you to write down what in this press release, what can you possibly live with? What in this press release is contradictory and wrong? What can be adjusted? What could be added or taken away to make this a better bill? Because it's going to pass. And you know what? Dave and a number of other residents, because I made that offer to everyone, everyone who would do that in a responsible way, in a reasonable way. And I said, if you tell me everything's bad, you're going to get what the governor wants. And so I took that information and I said, I promise you I'll give it to the governor's people. So I went to Mark Pelka. He is the Undersecretary for Criminal Justice. Through him, I got all of those emails. You can FOI my email to see the forwards and my comments. And I said, what can we do for our business owners that sell guns in our town? What can we do for our law-abiding gun owners? And I said, I'll work with you. So here's what happened. And I don't want to leave anything out, okay? That first bill, okay, had nothing in it about criminals. We increased penalties for people who commit firearms infractions. We strengthened the penalties or the parole and the bail conditions in that bill. Okay, we strengthened penalties for lost and stolen guns. It's unfortunate if your gun is stolen or lost, just report it. Okay, we protected concealed firearms, and I know open carry was a big concern for a lot of people, but what was wrong in that bill was it said if you're concealed carrying and you go to a restaurant or a bar where there's alcohol served and that gun's exposed, you can get arrested. And I said to Mark Pelka, what happens when the dad is out with his family and they go to the wooden tap and that gun's exposed? And you know what? You want him to lock it in his car? Like, we got a problem with people breaking in the cars. Okay? So that doesn't make sense to me. They took that out. They protected that conceal. And if you have a bulge or you reach up for a box of cereal at the supermarket, that's also protected too. Okay? We went and we said there was a provision in that bill to say everybody's limited to buying one handgun a month. It increased to 3 for residents through retail, not private purchases, not inheritances, and 6 for instructors. We expanded that. There was talk about an ammunition tax. I spoke vocally. When I was at that shooting range and I saw all those casings on the ground, that's their sport. I go skiing every weekend of the winter. If they started putting a tax on my lift tickets, I wouldn't be happy. I spoke vocally against that ammunition tax. I spoke vocally against micro-stamping, which didn't happen, which would be a cost to gun owners. Okay? For me, I fought for everything I thought that I could fight for that would keep our community safe, criminals in jail, and people who are mentally ill, guns out of their hands. And at the end of the day, all that advocacy, all that compromise, I had to exchange my yes vote for that. Do I wish we could have had a hybrid open carry? Do I wish they said, if you have an AR-15, you can't open carry that. But if you're a responsible gun owner, you can carry a pistol? Yes. In fact, I asked, and they told me no. Okay? And that's the thing about compromise, right? Compromise, people typically walk away feeling they didn't get enough or they took too much away. And I'll say this one last thing, because people have questioned my belief and my support in the U.S. Constitution. I'll just say this, okay? That Constitution, when our forefathers sat down to write that, they didn't agree. It was the great compromise of the time, and it is a great document, and that's how I chose to govern. And so, if there's any other follow-up, I'd be happy to answer. But that's how I handled that bill, and I try to talk to as many people and listen and learn and respect the rights of law-abiding gun owners. I got a question in the back.
So my name's Josh. I actually own a firearms store in town. Chris and I have talked about this. One comment, one question on it. With the signing of that bill, that eliminated about 25% of my business. It's killing small businesses all across the state. But my simple question is, how does this bill make it safer? How does it affect criminals who continuously break the law?
Mm-hmm. So I mentioned that the original legislation of 6667 had nothing in it for criminals, and they increased the penalties for people that broke the law with firearms. They made them more severe. They also changed the conditions for bail and parole for these criminals. I'm not sure if I'm missing anything else.
Yeah. So how does this stop criminals from obtaining illegal firearms? Because that's what they do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean,
think any of the cases that have happened in Southington or American.
No, it's possible. It's likely most of those firearms were legal at some point and then became illegal, right? So the whole issue is about trying to control the number of firearms that are out there in the world. Yeah, right. No law is ever going to.
Most of them are trafficked in from the south. Not sold in the state of Connecticut.
Sure, and if we could have stronger gun laws in other states, we would take that, and that would help that, but we can't control for that. So what we try to do is do what we can control for, which is passing laws here in the state of Connecticut. And if you look at all the data, Connecticut by far and away is safer than most other states that have less gun laws.
So looked at the data, and most gun charges are dropped in the state of Connecticut.
Right.
That was just published about 3 days ago, too, the study.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the specific circumstances of the case, too, as to why they're dropped and what you're talking about when you say gun crime, right? Exactly what it is you're talking about.
Yeah, carrying an illegal firearm, a felon having a firearm, 75 Center Street the other day, pending conviction of the guy that was out on bond, on $1 million bond. How did he obtain a firearm? Criminals do not follow the law. Adding more gun laws on law-abiding citizens, fortunately, just infringes on those law-abiding citizens.
So what are you most proud of when it comes to saying, I voted for 6667?
So, yeah.
That was one part that
Yeah.
I'm still waiting for an answer.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. Meeting, learning, and the art of negotiation for what we were able to change from point A of that legislation to what it turned out to be, I'm proud of the time and energy I spent to get it to where it was. And like I said, there's things that I wish I could have gotten farther. I did my best. I worked with like-minded legislators who advocated along my side from similar communities to Southington with similar concerns. And I'm proud that I was able to have a voice and to listen to those residents and then to get them somewhere, move the dial a little bit. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I've heard that, and I've witnessed it working up there myself, that, the group does work in a very bipartisan manner. Specifically, how did you accomplish that?
Well, thank you for that question. I think that the budget we talked about it to death. So I don't have to repeat that it was a bipartisan budget. There's so many moving parts in a budget that have to be negotiated, and people came together at the end and passed that budget. I'll talk about an event that happened just as recently as yesterday. Early on in the campaign, I got a call from the president of the Connecticut Mobile Home Alliance, and his name is Dave Delahary. And there's a significant amount of mobile homes in Southington, not in the 81st, but he wanted to meet with me and we talked. And what's happening to those guys is they own their homes, but they lease their property. And these hedge fund corporations from different states like Michigan are just raising the cost of their property significantly. And so to the point where it's making it unaffordable for them. They're on fixed incomes. And so I went to the Capitol on some of the early days, and I met up with Representative Cooley. Representative Cooley is in the 22nd District. He's a Republican. And I said, look, this guy came to me. What can we do to help out the mobile home people? And there was less in it for me than for him, because those people vote for him. And I was proud that 2 days ago, there was a bill that was put forth that will enable those mobile home owners to purchase the land that their dwelling is on in the event that it goes for sale. First refusal. It was completely bipartisan. Representative Cooley and I worked. I went to the majority leader on the day it was on the goal list and said, can we push this up for a vote sooner? The advocates were in the audience. We got it to a vote. It passed the House. It passed the Senate. It was signed by the governor. And it wasn't like it wasn't a partisan vote. So that's one example of how I operated in a bipartisan way. I'm not afraid to talk to anyone on the other side of the aisle. And especially when it's for a good cause like that bill.
Thank you.
Yep. Max back there is saying we're at time, but I'll take another question. If anyone else has a question, we can take one more.
One question I have for both of you.
Okay.
In the last days of the session, there's a lot of bills that get killed on the floor with the time. Is there any bill that you both wish that had got passed this year, and what are the prospects for next year?
I have to think about that one a little bit. I'm trying to think of all the bills that we passed out of the House that died in the Senate, which happens every year too.
Yeah, that happened on the last day, especially.
Right.
So
I have one bill, and I'm not sure if it was on the goal list or not, but it didn't get called. But again, early on in the session, a couple came to me. They met with me and they asked, they had adopted a foster child out of foster care in Massachusetts. In Connecticut, if you adopt a child out of foster care, you get a tuition benefit, because you might get that child at an older age, or you don't want to disincentivize someone who's willing to adopt a foster child, and so you get an in-state tuition benefit. This couple had gotten their child from Massachusetts, and unfortunately that they don't get the benefit because the child comes from DCF, Massachusetts. I worked with them. I worked with Representative Linehan, who is the chair of the Children's Committee, and Representative Haddad of the Higher Ed Committee, and we got a bill out of committee that would offer grants for people in that situation. It never made it to a vote on the floor, but I'm going to go back because, and those two guys, they came up and they testified in the public hearing that adopted the child. They said, we probably wouldn't be eligible in terms of our income status, but we're doing this for we want to encourage people to adopt children out of foster care. If we could educate kids out of foster care, we're going to put them on a great path. We're going to improve our society, and maybe if we educate them in state, we're going to keep them in state. So that's a bill that never made it out, but I watched as it went along.
Yeah, I think about the changes to the ECS formula that have been proposed, and this is a major, but right now there are 11 different funding formulas, depending on the kind of school you go to, which just leads to all sorts of confusion for towns, for families, for kids. I had started working on a proposal 5 years ago. Representative Curry, Representative Poulos, and the Education Committee got it down to one formula, which would have made it a lot simpler and streamlined it and saved money in the long run. But it was really complicated in a major policy change like that, and we're going to have to come back at it, right? It takes years to get major issues like that done, but it would make sense if we treated all schools the same and funded them adequately, regardless of the kind of school, whether it's an ag school or a magnet school or a charter school or your traditional public school. The kid in the seat deserves the same level of funding, regardless of the kind of seat that they're sitting in. So.
Thanks for that question. I guess I'll close out by saying I want to add some thanks to some people. First of all, I want to thank all of you residents for coming tonight, for being interested. It means a great deal to me to be able to interact and to hear your concerns, your ongoing concerns, and input. I want to thank Majority Leader Rojas for taking time out of his busy schedule, coming here from East Hartford.
He didn't really need me to be here. He did great.
I want to thank the Southington Public Library, the director, for giving us this space tonight. It's a busy time for libraries in the summer, and space is at a premium. Thank you for that. I want to thank Max he's my outreach coordinator, from my staff. All the pamphlets that you could pick one up if you didn't get one on the way out. He prepared all of that, helped me with a lot of the promotion of the event. I want to thank Ethan in the back, who's working as a volunteer for me this summer at different events. And anyone else who I might have missed, thank you for helping me to do my job best.